Welcome to This Explainer. You know, by the year 1860, the United States was literally standing on the edge of a cliff. Decades of growing tension had pushed the country to a true breaking point. And to really grasp why, we have to consider the sheer, staggering scale of what was about to happen, a conflict that would eventually claim well over 600,000 American lives. This isn't just a story about a single, sudden moment in time. It's a deep dive into how long-standing divisions over slavery, economics, and states' rights finally tore a nation in two. So, let's jump right in and see how this incredible tragedy actually unfolded.
All right, here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to start by examining the breaking point, then we'll compare the two very different economies, explore the intense political battleground of states' rights and slavery, break down the pivotal 1860 election, and finally, look at the spark that ignited the whole shebang at Fort Sumter.
So, let's kick things off with Section 1, the breaking point, a nation divided. Moving right along to Section 2, two very different economies, North versus South. It's absolutely vital to emphasize right out of the gate that the American Civil War didn't just happen overnight. It was the result of a massive, decades-long pressure cooker. By the mid-1800s, the northern and southern states hadn't just grown apart politically, they were living entirely different realities. Up north, the Industrial Revolution had completely supercharged things. We're talking bustling cities, expanding railroads, huge factory production, and a diverse economic engine built entirely on free labor. But down south, the economy was almost exclusively agricultural, and the defining feature of that economy was its deep, fundamental dependence on enslaved labor. Thanks to the cotton gin, cotton was incredibly profitable, which locked the plantation system firmly in place. So you essentially had two incredibly powerful, totally distinct economic engines trying to operate inside the exact same country, and they were pulling in completely opposite directions.
And naturally, those stark economic differences, they created completely opposing political priorities. Because the South's incredible agricultural wealth relied entirely on enslaved labor, Southern leaders felt they absolutely had to protect and expand slavery, especially as the U.S. aggressively expanded into new Western territories. Why did expansion matter so much? Well, it was all about the math in Washington. It was about maintaining their voting power in the Senate. If too many new free states entered the Union, the South feared they'd permanently lose their political voice. Meanwhile, up north, a growing number of people vehemently opposed the expansion of slavery into these new lands, wanting to keep those territories open for free labor. Plus, you had a smaller but highly vocal group starting to push for outright abolition everywhere. Which brings us to Section 3, States' Rights and Slavery, the political battleground.
So this massive economic and political divide fueled the absolute biggest political fight of the era. To defend their push for westward expansion, Southern political leaders leaned heavily into one specific legal argument: states' rights. Basically, the idea was that individual states had the ultimate authority to decide if slavery was legal within their own borders, totally free from any federal interference or overreach. Now, we're looking at this neutrally as a documented historical and legal position held by Southern politicians back then. But, and this is a really important but, we have to be totally clear about the mainstream historical consensus today. Historians overwhelmingly agree that the core right being so fiercely defended under this constitutional umbrella was, fundamentally, the institution of slavery itself. For literally decades, the United States Congress desperately tried to fix this widening fracture through legislation. They tried all these complex compromises just to keep the peace. You had the Missouri Compromise in 1820, tried to draw a literal line in the sand. Then the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. Brilliant statesmen were practically exhausting themselves trying to keep the country patched together with these legislative band-aids. But here's the crazy part. Over the years, these efforts didn't cool things down at all. They actually cranked up the pressure. The tension just kept building because these political compromises were utterly failing to resolve that core underlying moral and economic divide. Eventually, all those intense political arguments in Washington started turning into actual physical violence out on the frontier way before any official war was declared. The 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act is a prime example. It allowed local residents to vote on whether to permit slavery, which directly sparked a brutal period we now call Bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers just flooded into the territory trying to sway the vote, and almost immediately, armed conflict erupted. Rival factions were literally clashing in the streets and fields, burning towns, attacking each other. The nation wasn't just debating anymore, it was already bleeding out west. All right, let's move into Section 4, the pivotal 1860 election, the boiling point.
If the previous decades were the pressure cooker heating up, the election of 1860 was the moment the alarm bells started screaming. Just think about this staggering number for a second: 0. Abraham Lincoln, representing the brand new Republican Party, won the 1860 presidential election without carrying a single Southern state. 0. Not one. Yet, because the population was growing so fast up north, he still captured enough electoral votes to win the presidency outright. You can imagine the absolute shockwaves this sent through the South. They realized they had essentially been entirely shut out of the highest office in the land. This election results created a catastrophic disconnect. See, Abraham Lincoln's actual stated stance during the campaign was pretty moderate for his party. He firmly opposed expanding slavery into new territories, yes, but he explicitly and repeatedly said he did not intend to abolish it where it already existed in the South. But Southern readers, they simply didn't believe him. A wave of intense political paranoia just swept through the region. They looked at Lincoln's election as a direct, immediate, existential threat to slavery and their political power. Despite what he actually promised, they felt their entire economic system and way of life was fundamentally under attack.
And that perceived existential threat? It led to immediate, drastic action. It played out exactly like a series of falling dominoes. In December 1860, just weeks after Lincoln won, South Carolina became the very first state to officially secede, or break away from the United States. Over the next few months, that domino effect took fierce hold. Several other Southern states held highly charged conventions and followed right behind them. Ultimately, these seceded states banded together to form an entirely new rival government, the Confederate States of America. So here we are. We've got a situation where two separate governments are claiming the exact same continent, which brings up a massive question. How did this intense political division and even the radical act of secession finally cross the line into an all-out bloody war? Let's find out in Section 5, The Spark at Fort Sumter, The Explosion. The political maneuvering was officially over. I want you to picture the distant smoke and the tremendous, heavy sound of cannon fire echoing off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. Tensions finally snapped on April 12, 1861. The flashpoint was Fort Sumter, which was a U.S. military garrison sitting on an island in Charleston Harbor. The newly formed Confederacy demanded that U.S. troops abandon the territory they just claimed, but the federal garrison said no. They refused to surrender. In response, Confederate forces opened fire, launching a massive 34-hour bombardment that eventually forced the U.S. troops to surrender. And historians across the board universally recognize this momentous event as the official explosive start of the American Civil War. The fallout from Fort Sumter was instantaneous and it was massive. Following the attack, President Lincoln immediately called for federal troops to suppress the rebellion and preserve the Union. Well, in response to that call to arms, several more southern states decided to jump ship and join the Confederacy, while strategically vital border states found themselves completely torn apart by intense internal division. Suddenly, both sides were rapidly mobilizing massive armies. And what's truly astonishing here is that it's thousands of young men eagerly signed up to fight. Leaders and regular folks on both sides share this incredibly naive belief that the conflict would be over in just 90 days. They had absolutely no idea they were gearing up for the deadliest conflict in American history. Let's take a quick step back and look at the big picture here. The Civil War wasn't a sudden random accident. It was the breaking point of decades of deepening division over slavery, the fundamental clash of two completely distinct economies, and fierce, bitter debates over states' rights, all culminating in that 1860 election and the spark at Fort Sumter. And understanding these deeply intertwined root causes really matters for us today, because it shows us exactly how long-standing political and economic fractures can push an entire society to the absolute brink. But that brings us to the end of today's explainer, and it leaves us hanging on one major, lingering question. With the nation completely fractured and these massive armies mobilizing on both sides for what they thought would be a quick little fight, what actually happens when these two immense forces finally clash on the battlefield? Well, you're definitely going to want to join us for our next explainer to see how the major battles of the Civil War unfold. Thanks so much for learning with us, and I'll see you next time.